Austin Center for Spiritual Living presents Self-Reliance, Key to Limitless Life, a talk given by Reverend Dr. Richard Imprussia on Sunday, December 18th, 2011.
It's good to see all of you here today. And it's been an interesting time for us this morning because of the abrupt change in plans, and we've had to adjust all the way around, and I think it's wonderful. As Mary says, we're in the flow. We get in the flow. And Gavin doesn't. He comes to church but doesn't even show up. Anyway, but that's okay. You see, in life, we have to learn to trust the mystery. We know we don't have all the answers. A lot of people think they have to have the answers, or if they don't have the answers, at least they make up one to try to convince themselves or somebody else. Ultimately, we end up trusting the mystery. And you've heard me say it so often. Trust in God, and then show up and take your assignment. And that's kind of what life is about. Yet in that process of showing up, we can focus our attention in various directions. I think we can live life fully. I think that the presence within us, it's there, it's always there, it's always been there, it always will be. And to learn to live in this life, to truly be able to live a life of fulfillment, we've got to become awareness of that truth about our nature. How many times have you found yourself wandering around or feel like you're wandering around in darkness with a flashlight and you have a blindfold on? I have a little illustration here that I think says it beautifully. And I love that depiction. Wandering around in the darkness with his lamp, trying to find his way blindfolded. And so many of us do that. And I like that almost more. I could have left the caption off altogether. Any God you find within yourself would probably be very hard to lose again. And the fact of the matter is it's not that you have to find this, you just have to awaken to it, because it is that which is within you always, always, always. Can you just darken this for a moment so we're not distracted by it? I hadn't thought to give that instruction. You can't do it. Okay, that's all right. But let me just go on from here. You see, many of us kind of feel that we're limited because we see ourselves as separated from the whole of life, the life that is really that we admire so much, that we would like to be, that we would like to experience. And we tend to forget that there's something within us that when we begin to touch that, we find that there can be a God reliance, a self-reliance, where the self is the greater presence that exists within each one of us. And so very often we have a tendency to deny that. Never, never, never think of being apart from God. Now that's easy for me to say, isn't it? But you see, we can begin to work on ourselves by doing the simple affirmative process of saying, I am one with God. Remember what we were told by Paul of Tarsus? We live, move, and have our being where? In God. And this is the message of all of the great Enlightenment traditions from every era in history, every epic time in history. We're made in the image and likeness of that which made us. We live, move, and have our being within that. So if we continually affirm to ourselves, I am one with God. Is that too simple? Let's say that together, just for the heck of it. I am one with God. Does that give you kind of a rush? Or does it make you just a little bit embarrassed to be saying this sitting next to somebody that you don't want to admit that you really think that way about yourself? And a lot of people do that. You see, the God within us is really the inner door to limitless life. And when we say that, what do we mean by that? what I mean by that is that there's something in us that's greater than the human us. It's always there. It always will be there. It always has been there. And it's not only the possibility and the potential of us. It's an absolute certainty. It's the ultimate certainty of who we are. And it awaits our recognition of it, the God presence. I am one with God. I am one with God. God and I are one. Jesus put it this way. He says, I am in you and you are in me and I am in the Father. And the things that I do, you can do too, and even greater things than this. He was talking about the unity of all things and the possibility of what's available to us in order to be able to express in this life. I think it's a pretty great message. It's a pretty phenomenal thing. But we don't take it real seriously because all those words came from 2,000 years ago or even much longer ago than that. And we've been taught them when we were a little kid, when we had knee-jerk reactions to that now. And so we have a tendency to reject it or say, it can't really be that. It may have been that way for him or others a long time ago. But the fact of the matter is, we are one with that created it all. We've set some pretty severe limitations on ourselves. I ask the question, who knows what we could do? Who knows what we could achieve? Who knows what we could accomplish if we really relied or touched that inner something, that something that resides within us. See, the power of our minds are just absolutely incredible. I remember a story, it's a true story, that I heard some time ago, and some of you may have heard this before. It was about a man that was very gravely ill, and he was in the hospital, and the doctors couldn't find what the problem was, and he had several doctors around him, and he was lying in bed when this group of 3 or 4 doctors was there, and he asked the doctors, he says, well, doctor, what's wrong with me? Can you heal me? And they looked at him and they said, sir, we can't find the problem. If we can't diagnose the problem, we don't know what to do. And he says, well, what do you have to do to diagnose it? And he says, we don't know. He says, if we just had a diagnosis, we'd be able to take some kind of action. Well, it turned out that there was a man that was in town doing some lectures before a medical society who was world famous for the kind of ailment that this person seemed to have. And these doctors decided to invite him in to look at this patient. And he came in and he muttered around him and pressed him and poked him and did the various things and talked to him a little bit, and the other doctors were huddled around. And finally, that famous doctor took the others to the side, and the man could hear what was going on. And they said, well, doctor, what is your diagnosis? And the man looked at him, the famous doctor looked at them all, and he says, moribundus. Now, that's Latin for the word moribund, and moribund means on the brink of death, on the verge of death. And this man in the bed heard this. Within a week, he was well. He was up. They couldn't account for it. He left and he went about his business, and it was just an incredible kind of an experience. And the doctors were sort of baffled. Well, a year or so later, this man, the patient, happened to be in the city where this famous doctor had his clinic and his office, and he wanted to go by and thank him for saving his life. So he walked in, and the doctor saw him and invited him in the office, and he said, doctor, I want to thank you for saving my life. And he says, well, I didn't do anything to save your life. He says, oh, yes, you did. You diagnosed my problem. He was moribund. See, he didn't know what it meant. But he had a diagnosis, and he knew he wouldn't be cured until he was diagnosed. And he got well. You get that connection. It's incredible, the incredible kind of capability that we have. You see, it's that kind of faith that can completely transform whatever is going on in our life. I call this achieving that state of God realization, or self-realization with a capital S, where the S represents the God self within each one of us. But The usual kind of self-realization or self-awareness is more than just believing that you got everything together, that you have it made, that and you're secure in life. You see, real self-realization, the realization of the God self, having that self-reliance on who it is we really are, takes courage. Having courage to listen to the inner prompting that is constantly telling us who we are and what is it we are supposed to do. And we all have that capacity to be able to express that way, to feel that way, to grow into that kind of a realization, to grow to that point where we can sense what it is we are here to do. Life is to be experienced. It is to be expressed. We each are living a life that should be a life of being rather than a life of just getting, acquiring, achieving. All of that is fine. But that is secondary to the being. And when I talk about being, I'm talking about expressing the truth of who you are. It is being ourselves. Dr. Ernest Holmes makes a comment that I like very much. He says this. Ernest Holmes is our founder, the founder of this teaching that we call the Science of Mind. And this is taken out of context, and it's just little phrases from one section in his book. He says, every person is an incarnation of God. In order to fulfill our own divine destiny, all we have to do is be ourselves. Each of us is what we are, because that is what God is in us. See, what we are doing right now is what God is doing in us and through us. And we choose to give the opening to whatever it is that we want to express. But we come along so very often because of our conditioning in the environment, our life of living and really believing in the human existence as being the highest form of existence, forgetting that we are spiritual beings, coincidentally having an experience in the human form today. There are three real cripplers, I think, that are mental habits that can stand in the way of our truly being able to experience the fullness of life. And these are the three that I want to talk about here today. It's what I call the dependency habit, the habit of the need to manipulate that so many other people have, and the comparison with others habit. These three things can stifle us, they can bog us down, and they can keep us at the point where we immobilize ourselves in the whole process of life. Let's look at the first one here, the dependency habit. First of all, what you got to realize is that it takes two to tango. You see, this is not a solo act that we are in. So anytime we enter into the kind of relationship that a derogatorily oriented kind of a relationship that we can say is a dependency. That's the kind I'm talking about. There are other dependencies. You know, I depend on a lot of people to do certain things, but I enter into agreements with them. You know all of that. But we can get into the kind of a dependency. People talk a lot about codependency today. I like the straight term dependent because they're both dependent. And it takes two people to do this. And this is kind of like entering into a pact